Darla Flores sat frozen at the center of the candlelit table, while her husband's hand rested comfortably on another woman's thigh, beneath the white linen cloth. Around her crystal glasses clinked softly, investors laughed, and her mother smiled like nothing was wrong. Then Evelyn lifted her champagne glass and said with a laugh that made Darla's stomach turn cold, "To our difficult child. 40 years old and still exhausting everyone who loves her." The table erupted in awkward laughter. Nobody defended her. Not her husband Garrett, not her sister Sabrina, not even her father. And for the first time in her life, Darla realized they all knew something she didn't. If you've ever been treated like the problem just because you finally stopped staying silent, this story is going to hit harder than you expect. The first time Evelyn Flores called Darla difficult, she was 6 years old and crying quietly in the back seat of her father's Mercedes. Sabrina had spilled orange juice all over Darla's favorite sweater during church brunch, then blamed her for it. Evelyn never even asked what happened. She had simply sighed while staring out the windshield. "Why does everything with you have to become a problem?" Darla remembered shrinking into the leather seat after that. She remembered wiping her tears silently because crying always made things worse. That was the thing nobody understood about children like Darla. They didn't become quiet naturally. They became quiet because silence felt safer than rejection. By the time Darla turned 12, she had already mastered the art of making herself smaller. Smaller opinions, smaller emotions, smaller needs. Meanwhile, Sabrina Flores walked through life like sunlight followed her personally. Beautiful, blonde, effortless. Their mother adored her openly. "Look at Sabrina," Evelyn would say at family dinners. "She lights up every room she walks into." Then her eyes would drift toward Darla. "You could learn from your sister." Darla had spent most of her childhood trying to understand why existing seemed so easy for Sabrina and so exhausting for her. Their home in Greenwich looked perfect from the outside, the kind of wealthy suburban house featured in luxury real estate magazines. White columns, black shutters, hydrangeas lining the front walkway. Inside, however, love had conditions, and Darla always seemed to fail them. Her father, Richard Flores, tried in his own timid way. He bought Darla books, asked about school, took her for pancakes on Sunday mornings whenever Evelyn was too stressed. But he never defended her. Not really. When Evelyn criticized Darla's clothes, Richard looked down at his plate. When Sabrina mocked Darla at dinner, Richard changed the subject. When Evelyn snapped, "Why can't you be easy for once?" Richard would quietly say, "Let's not fight tonight." Darla learned early that peace in the Flores family required one person absorbing everyone else's cruelty without reacting. That person was her. At 14, she started helping her father organize paperwork for his small accounting business because Sabrina got headaches whenever numbers were involved. At 16, Darla drove Evelyn to doctor appointments after Richard's heart scare. At 18, while Sabrina partied through college orientation, Darla stayed home managing bills after Richard forgot several mortgage payments. Nobody thanked her. Responsibility became invisible once people expected it from you. The older Darla got, the more useful she became, and somehow, the less loved she felt. Even now, at 40 years old, sitting inside her massive, empty kitchen the morning after her birthday dinner, humiliation, Darla still heard Evelyn's voice in her head, like a scar that never healed. "You've always been difficult." The words echoed while she stood barefoot at the marble counter, staring into cold coffee. Upstairs, Garrett was showering, like nothing had happened. Like publicly humiliating his wife beside another woman at her own birthday dinner was normal. Darla closed her eyes. She could still see Chloe Bennett's red fingernails resting near Garrett's wrist beneath the tablecloth. Still see Sabrina smirking while sipping champagne. Still see Evelyn laughing. Something inside her felt dangerously close to breaking, or maybe awakening. The sound of Garrett's footsteps interrupted her thoughts. He entered the kitchen wearing an expensive gray suit and adjusting his cufflinks. Perfect. Controlled. Untouchable. Are you seriously still upset about last night? He asked, casually. Darla stared at him. That was Garrett's talent. Making cruelty sound reasonable. You held another woman's hand in front of me. Garrett exhaled dramatically. Jesus, Darla. Chloe works for me. She was touching your leg. You're imagining things again. Again. There it was. The word he always used whenever she noticed something uncomfortable. Again. Darla crossed her arms tightly. You embarrassed me. Garrett grabbed his car keys from the counter. No, your mother embarrassed you. Don't dump that on me. The cruelty landed softly. Precisely. Garrett never yelled when he wanted to hurt her. That would require emotion. Instead, he spoke like a surgeon making clean incisions. Darla watched him walk toward the door. Did you sleep with her? Garrett stopped. For 1 second. 1 tiny second. But Darla saw it. Then he turned slowly, expression unreadable. This is exactly what your mother means when she calls you difficult. The room went silent. Darla felt something cold move through her chest. Not pain, recognition. Because suddenly she realized something horrifying. Garrett and Evelyn spoke about her the same way. Like she was exhausting, irrational, broken. Like her emotions were inconveniences instead of responses. Garrett left without another word. The front door shut, and the house became painfully quiet. Darla stood there motionless before finally walking upstairs toward the master bedroom. She didn't even know what she was searching for. Maybe proof. Maybe reassurance. Maybe a reason to still trust her own reality. Garrett's closet smelled like cedarwood cologne and dry cleaning chemicals. Everything hung perfectly arranged by color. Control. That was Garrett's religion. Darla opened drawers mechanically until she noticed something strange shoved deep beneath folded sweaters. A velvet jewelry box. Small. Hidden. Her stomach tightened instantly. She opened it slowly. Inside was not jewelry. It was paper. Old paper. Yellowed with age. Darla frowned and unfolded the contents carefully. A hospital bracelet. Tiny. Faded. The date read October 14th, 1985. Her birthday. But the last name printed beneath baby girl wasn't Flores. It said Hayes. Darla's breath caught. She stared at it again. Baby girl Hayes. Not Flores. Not her father's name. Her fingers began trembling. A second folded paper slipped from beneath the bracelet. An old photograph. Evelyn stood outside a hospital wearing oversized sunglasses while holding newborn Darla. But the man beside her wasn't Richard. Darla had never seen him before. Tall, dark-haired, one arm wrapped around Evelyn possessively. On the back of the photo, written in faded blue ink, were 4 words that made her blood run cold. She has your eyes. Darla sat down slowly on the bedroom floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Suddenly, the birthday dinner replayed in fragments, the glances, the tension, Evelyn freezing when Darla asked the question. You were never supposed to ask that. Darla looked down at the bracelet again, then whispered shakily into the empty room. Who the hell is Caroline Hayes? Darla barely slept after finding the hospital bracelet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faded name again. Baby girl Hayes. Not Flores. Not Richard's daughter. At 3 a.m, she sat alone in the dark living room, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, while rain streaked softly against the enormous glass windows of the Whitmore estate. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. Too polished, too quiet, like a museum dedicated to a woman who no longer existed. Her phone screen glowed beside her. No texts from Garrett. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. Of course not. Garrett Whitmore never chased people emotionally. He waited for them to come back embarrassed for having needs in the first place. That was his power. He made other people feel unreasonable for wanting basic human decency. Darla used to admire his composure when they first met. Now she understood it differently. It wasn't calmness. It was emotional distance disguised as sophistication. The next morning, Garrett was already in the kitchen when Darla came downstairs. He stood near the espresso machine scrolling through emails, perfectly dressed in navy slacks and a white button-down shirt. He looked expensive. That was the word people always used for Garrett. Expensive. Everything about him projected control: his tailored suits, his measured voice, his perfectly restrained smile. Even his cruelty arrived elegantly packaged. "You look tired," he said, without glancing up. Darla poured herself coffee slowly. "I didn't sleep." Garrett nodded absently. Maybe stop spiraling over imaginary problems. There it was again. Imaginary. Darla stared at him over the rim of her coffee cup. For 15 years, Garrett had perfected the art of making her distrust her own instincts. If she felt hurt, she was sensitive. If she questioned him, she was paranoid. If she cried, she was unstable. And if she finally got angry, difficult. The same word Evelyn used. The realization made her stomach tighten. "How long have you known my mother calls me that behind my back?" Darla asked quietly. Garrett finally looked at her. His expression didn't change. "Darla, no. Answer me." He sighed like a patient father dealing with an emotional child. "Your mother loves you." "That's not what I asked." Garrett leaned against the marble counter. "I think your family gets exhausted trying to manage your emotions sometimes." Manage. Not support. Not understand. Manage. Darla felt humiliation crawl up her spine. "You really believe I'm the problem, don't you?" Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. Not because he felt guilty, because he hated emotionally messy conversations. "I think you create conflict where there doesn't need to be any." Darla laughed softly. A broken sound. "You held another woman under the table at my birthday dinner." Garrett rolled his eyes. "Chloe touched my hand for 2 seconds." "So you admit it happened." "I admit you're obsessed with making yourself miserable lately." That sentence hit harder than yelling would have, because Garrett always spoke like truth belonged exclusively to him. Darla suddenly remembered something Naomi, an old therapist she stopped seeing years ago, once told her. People who manipulate emotionally often make you defend your reality instead of discussing their behavior. At the time, Darla dismissed it. Now, the words echoed differently. Garrett grabbed his laptop bag. "We have investors flying in next week. I need you functional." Functional. Not happy. Not loved. Functional. Like an employee. Like part of the machinery keeping his life running smoothly. Darla stared at him carefully. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really see her husband, instead of constantly trying to please him. Garrett Whitmore was handsome. Yes. Charismatic. Intelligent. But emotionally, he treated intimacy like weakness. And she had spent 15 years starving for warmth from a man who survived by withholding it. "Do you even love me anymore?" she asked quietly. Garrett froze for half a second. Then came the familiar irritation. "Why do you always ask impossible questions before work?" Impossible questions. Darla felt something inside herself crack further, because a man in love didn't treat love like an inconvenience. Garrett checked his watch. "I'll be late tonight." "Business dinner." "Yes." "With Chloe." His expression hardened instantly. "See? This is exactly the behavior I'm talking about." Then he left. Again. Leaving her alone with silence and self-doubt. But this time, something felt different. Darla no longer fully believed him. That terrified Garrett more than she realized. Hours later, Darla drove into Manhattan for lunch with Sabrina. Her sister had insisted. "Mom's worried about you." Of course she was. Not worried about Darla hurting. Worried about Darla becoming inconvenient. The restaurant overlooked Central Park, filled with wealthy women in designer coats, sipping white wine at noon. Sabrina arrived 20 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored Dior blazer. Beautiful as always. Effortless as always. God? Sabrina sighed while sitting down. You look awful. Darla stared at her. No hello, no hug, nothing. You came because Mom sent you? Sabrina removed her sunglasses casually. She's worried you're overreacting. Darla laughed bitterly. Interesting word choice. Sabrina leaned forward. Darla. Garrett works with attractive women. You always do this. Always. Another word designed to make her feel irrational. Darla studied her sister carefully. How close are you and Garrett? Sabrina blinked once, then smiled too quickly. What kind of question is that? The kind people ask when something feels wrong. Sabrina took a sip of wine. You know what your problem is? There it was. Darla stayed silent. You think being unhappy makes you morally superior. The cruelty landed so naturally it almost impressed her. Darla remembered being 10 years old and overhearing Sabrina tell friends Darla cries over everything. She remembered Evelyn laughing afterward. The humiliation never really left. You've always enjoyed making me feel crazy, Darla said quietly. Sabrina scoffed. Oh my God. Here we go. No. Seriously. Darla's voice sharpened unexpectedly. You and Mom decide who I am before I even enter the room. Sabrina's expression shifted slightly. For a moment, something uncomfortable flickered there. Guilt, maybe. Then it disappeared. You're exhausting, Sabrina muttered. The exact same word Evelyn used. The exact same tone Garrett used. Darla suddenly felt cold, like she was finally seeing a pattern she had ignored her entire life. Not because she was weak, because she desperately wanted to be loved. That made people tolerate things they should never tolerate. Sabrina checked her phone casually. Garrett says you've been snooping through financial stuff. Darla's eyes narrowed instantly. You talked to Garrett about me? Sabrina hesitated. Tiny, but enough. Darla's pulse quickened. How often do you talk to my husband? Sabrina looked annoyed now. Don't start. How often? Sometimes he asks for advice because you shut down emotionally every time there's conflict. Darla stared at her sister in disbelief. Garrett discussing their marriage with Sabrina. Behind her back. Again. Humiliation rose hot in her throat. Then Sabrina made the mistake that changed everything. She leaned back in her chair and muttered carelessly, Honestly, Mom was right. You ruin things eventually. Silence. The restaurant noise faded around Darla. Ruin things. Not difficult. Not sensitive. Ruin. Like her existence itself contaminated people. Darla looked at her sister slowly, and, for the first time in 40 years, she stopped trying to earn understanding. What exactly did I ruin? She asked softly. Sabrina's face tightened instantly. Too late. Darla saw it. Fear. Real fear. And suddenly, Darla knew something with absolute certainty. There was a secret buried underneath this family, and everyone except her had spent decades protecting it. Darla couldn't stop thinking about Sabrina's face, that tiny flicker of panic after saying, You ruin things eventually. People only panic when they accidentally tell the truth. The realization haunted her all the way back to Connecticut. Rain blurred across the windshield while traffic crawled through Manhattan, but Darla barely noticed any of it. Her mind replayed every strange moment from the last 15 years. Garrett and Sabrina whispering during holidays. Evelyn defending Garrett more aggressively than she defended her own daughter. Richard avoiding eye contact anytime Darla mentioned feeling unwanted. And Chloe. Beautiful, polished Chloe Bennett with her expensive perfume and knowing smiles. Darla suddenly felt surrounded by invisible conversations, like everyone in her life had been speaking a language she was never allowed to learn. By the time she pulled into the driveway of the Whitmore estate, her chest hurt from overthinking. The massive house stood glowing against the darkening evening sky. Warm lights behind enormous windows, perfect landscaping, luxury cars. From the outside, they looked like success. Inside, Darla increasingly felt like a tolerated guest. She entered quietly. The house smelled faintly of cedarwood and fresh flowers. Garrett hired florists to refresh arrangements every Thursday because appearances mattered to him almost religiously. Darla walked upstairs slowly toward Garrett's home office. She wasn't even sure what she was searching for anymore. Proof, answers. Permission to trust herself. The office door was locked. That immediately made her pulse rise. Garrett never locked doors before, not until recently. Darla stared at the keypad for a moment before trying the one code Garrett used for almost everything. 1107. His birthday. The lock clicked open. A cold wave of dread moved through her instantly. The office was immaculate: black shelves, leather furniture, framed business awards, expensive whiskey untouched on the side cabinet. Control lived here too. Darla moved carefully toward Garrett's desk. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then she noticed a second laptop, partially hidden beneath paperwork. Not Garrett's usual work computer. This one was slimmer, private. Her stomach tightened. The password screen glowed. She hesitated only briefly before typing the first thing that came to mind. Chloe. Wrong password. Darla exhaled shakily, then tried something else. Sabrina. The laptop unlocked immediately. Darla froze. For several seconds, she genuinely stopped breathing. No. No, no, no. Her hands began trembling violently as folders loaded across the screen. Financial transfers, legal documents, offshore accounts, emails. One folder labeled personal. Darla clicked it. Hundreds of messages appeared instantly, mostly between Garrett and Sabrina. Her vision blurred. At first, she tried convincing herself there had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe business investments. Maybe family estate planning. Maybe. Then she opened one email, and the illusion shattered completely. Sabrina. She's suspicious again. You need to calm her down before she starts digging. Garrett. I know how to handle Darla. Darla felt physically sick. Another email. Garrett. Once the restructuring is finished, the house and primary accounts will be protected. Sabrina Good. Mom says Darla would make the divorce impossible if she knew the truth. Divorce. The word punched through her chest. Darla scrolled faster now. Faster, like pain itself had become addictive. Then she found hotel confirmations, travel itineraries, messages from Chloe, and finally, a wire transfer authorization signed jointly by Garrett Whitmore and Sabrina Flores. $200,000 moved into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Darla stepped backward from the desk slowly. The room tilted. Her husband and sister were hiding money together, behind her back, planning for divorce, possibly for years. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. Suddenly, dozens of old moments made horrifying sense. Sabrina convincing Darla to sign documents quickly. Garrett insisting she didn't need to worry about finances. Evelyn repeatedly telling Darla a good wife doesn't obsess over money. Not because they trusted her, because they needed her ignorant. Darla felt humiliation burn through her body so intensely she thought she might collapse. 15 years. 15 years of loyalty, sacrifice, support, and all of them had treated her like a naive obstacle to manage. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted her instantly. Garrett. Darla slammed the laptop shut. Panic surged through her veins. She quickly shoved everything back exactly how she found it before locking the office again. Her pulse thundered as Garrett entered downstairs. Darla, he called casually. She wiped her face quickly and descended the staircase slowly, forcing herself to appear calm. Garrett loosened his tie while walking toward the kitchen. Long day. That familiar polished exhaustion. Except now, Darla saw something underneath it. Calculation. How was the city, he asked. Darla studied him carefully. This man had shared a bed with her for 15 years. And somehow, she suddenly realized she did not know him at all. Interesting, she answered quietly. Garrett opened the refrigerator. You and Sabrina work things out. There it was. Immediate monitoring. Darla forced herself not to react. She said you two talk a lot. Garrett shrugged lightly. She worries about you. The lie sounded effortless. Darla stared at him. How many lies had he told with that exact, calm expression? Hundreds, thousands. You ever feel guilty? She asked, suddenly. Garrett frowned. About what? Hurting people? His face hardened slightly. I think people hurt themselves most of the time. God. That answer. Cold. Detached. Empty. Darla realized Garrett genuinely believed emotional pain was weakness, which explained why empathy always felt transactional with him. Garrett stepped closer. You've been acting strange lately. Strange. Not devastated. Not betrayed. Just inconveniently emotional. Darla crossed her arms tightly. Would you ever leave me? The question caught him off guard. Barely. But enough. Garrett tilted his head slightly. Where is this coming from? Just answer. He smiled softly, that dangerous corporate smile investors loved. Darla, if I wanted to leave, you'd know. The words sounded reassuring, but something underneath them felt terrifying, like confidence, like preparation. Her stomach turned. Then Garrett's phone buzzed on the counter. A message preview lit the screen before he could grab it. Chloe. Miss you already. Silence. Garrett snatched the phone instantly. Too late. Darla had seen it. They stared at each other across the kitchen island. For the first time in their marriage. Garrett looked nervous. Only slightly. But real. Darla's voice came out terrifyingly calm. How long? Garrett said nothing. Don't insult me by lying again. His jaw tightened. It's complicated. The sentence shattered whatever remained of her illusion. Not denial. Not outrage. Complicated. Meaning true. Darla laughed softly, a devastated sound. You brought her to my birthday dinner. Garrett rubbed his forehead irritably. You're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. Darla suddenly realized something horrifying. Garrett didn't think betrayal mattered. Not if it benefited him. Not if appearances stayed intact. He stepped toward her carefully now. Darla, listen to me. You've been emotionally unstable for months. There it was again. The strategy. Rewrite her reality. Make her doubt herself. Control the narrative. But this time, something inside Darla refused to bend. You and Sabrina moved money offshore. The color drained from Garrett's face instantly. Silence. Real silence. Not polished silence. Fear. Darla saw it clearly, and suddenly she understood everything. Not only was Garrett cheating, he had been planning to destroy her financially while convincing everyone she was irrational, including her own family. Garrett's voice dropped dangerously low. You went through my office. Darla stared at him in disbelief. Not guilt, not apology. Violation of his privacy upset him more than betrayal destroyed her. You were going to leave me with nothing. Garrett's expression darkened. You don't understand how business works. No, Darla whispered. I don't understand how monsters work. For the first time in years, Garrett lost his composure. Only briefly, but enough. And in that moment, Darla realized something that terrified him far more than her tears ever had. She was finally starting to see him clearly. The Whitmore estate had never looked more beautiful, which somehow made everything feel crueler. Golden light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, while catered staff moved elegantly through the house, carrying champagne and tiny porcelain plates topped with truffle canapes. A jazz trio played softly near the fireplace. Expensive laughter floated through every room. Wealthy people always mastered the art of appearing untouched, even when entire lives were collapsing underneath the surface. Darla stood near the grand staircase in a black satin dress Garrett once claimed was his favorite. Tonight, he barely looked at her. The realization hurt more than she wanted to admit. Not because she still believed in him, but because rejection from someone who once knew your soul felt like mourning your own past. Guests kept approaching her with polished smiles. "Happy birthday, Darla. You look stunning." Garrett says the company's expanding again. "You must be proud." Proud. The word made her stomach twist. Because nobody in this room knew how much of Whitmore's strategic group existed because of her unpaid labor. The client retention systems, Darla built them. The investor presentations Garrett got praised for. Mostly her work. The crisis management strategies that made Garrett famous in corporate consulting circles, her ideas. But Garrett collected credit the way some men collected watches. Naturally, automatically, without shame. And Darla had spent 15 years convincing herself love meant supporting quietly from the background. Now she realized she had slowly disappeared there. "Smile," Sabrina whispered suddenly beside her. Darla turned sharply. Her sister looked flawless in a silver cocktail dress, holding a champagne flute like she belonged on magazine covers. "You look miserable," Sabrina added. Darla stared at her. "You helped him hide money from me." Sabrina's smile flickered briefly, then returned. "We are not doing this tonight." "Interesting answer." Sabrina leaned closer. "You need to calm down before you embarrass yourself." "Embarrass yourself. Not before Garrett hurts you. Not before the truth destroys you. Always Darla, managing everyone else's comfort." Darla looked around the room slowly. Investors, executives, family friends. Everyone admired Garrett Whitmore. And why wouldn't they? Men like Garrett thrived publicly because their cruelty happened privately. "Do you ever feel guilty?" Darla asked quietly. Sabrina sighed dramatically. "God, you make everything so heavy." Then she walked away. Like Darla's pain bored her. Across the room, Garrett stood beside Chloe Bennett near the bar. Tall, confident, beautiful together. Chloe laughed at something Garrett whispered into her ear, touching his arm casually. Too casually. Darla watched Garrett smile at Chloe with a softness she hadn't seen directed at her in years. Not tenderness, exactly, but interest, engagement, attention, things that once belonged to Darla. The humiliation burned deeper because Garrett didn't even seem worried about being discreet anymore, like he assumed she would tolerate anything. And maybe until now, she had. A waiter passed carrying fresh champagne. Darla grabbed one instantly, then another 20 minutes later. She rarely drank heavily, but tonight she needed something to numb the growing pressure inside her chest, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Her mother resented her. Her sister betrayed her. Her husband cheated on her. And somehow, they had all convinced Darla that she was the difficult one. The manipulation suddenly felt enormous. Years of tiny emotional cuts designed to make her question her own reality. "Mrs. Whitmore." Darla turned politely. Harold Bennett, one of Garrett's biggest investors, smiled warmly. "You and Garrett make an extraordinary team." Darla almost laughed. Team. If only he knew. Harold lowered his voice slightly. "Truthfully, Garrett would have never survived the early years without you." Darla blinked. "You noticed that Harold looked surprised." "Of course I did." For one painful second, emotion caught in her throat. Validation. Tiny. Unexpected. Devastating. Before she could respond, Garrett approached smoothly with Chloe beside him. "There you are," Garrett said lightly. His hand settled against Chloe's lower back, automatically. The intimacy of the gesture punched straight through Darla. Harold smiled politely. "We were just talking about how much you owe Darla for helping build this empire." Garrett laughed softly. "Darla definitely kept me sane in the early years. Kept me sane. Not built the systems, not saved the company, not sacrificed her career, just emotional support again." Darla stared at him quietly. Then Chloe smiled. "Oh, Garrett talks about how emotional those years were for you both." Emotional. Darla's pulse spiked instantly. How much exactly had Garrett told her? Garrett noticed the shift in Darla's face immediately. Warning flashed in his eyes. Subtle, sharp. Control yourself. Darla suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically, spiritually exhausted. Tired of pretending. Tired of absorbing humiliation gracefully so everyone else could remain comfortable. A fork tapped gently against crystal. Evelyn stood near the dining room, smiling elegantly. "Attention, everyone," she announced warmly. "Time for a birthday toast." Guests gathered closer. Garrett moved beside Darla finally, though his body felt emotionally miles away. Evelyn lifted her champagne glass. "I just want to say how proud I am of my daughters." Darla almost flinched at the plural, because praise from Evelyn usually arrived unevenly. "Sabrina has always brought lightness and joy into every room she enters." Applause. "Of course." Then Evelyn looked toward Darla and smiled. That same smile Darla spent her entire childhood trying to earn. "And Darla?" A pause. "Too long." "Well, our difficult child certainly keeps life interesting." Laughter erupted instantly around the room. Soft, awkward, uncomfortable, but real. Darla felt her entire body go cold. There it was again. Difficult. Publicly now. In front of everyone. And what destroyed her wasn't Evelyn saying it. It was watching Garrett laugh too. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just enough. Enough to confirm he agreed. Darla slowly looked around the room. Nobody defended her. Not Sabrina, not Richard, not Garrett. Her father stared down at his champagne glass silently. Cowardice disguised as peacekeeping. Darla's chest tightened painfully. Years, years of swallowing hurt to keep this family intact. And they still treated her like a burden. Evelyn continued smiling casually. "You know Darla. Sensitive about everything since birth." More laughter. That sentence broke something inside her. Since birth. The words echoed differently now. Not Flores. Haze. Punishment. Affair. Secrets. Suddenly, Darla realized something horrifying. Evelyn didn't accidentally call her difficult. She needed Darla to believe it. Because if Darla ever stopped believing she was the problem, the entire family narrative collapsed. Darla stood slowly. The room quieted immediately. Garrett's face tightened. Warning again. "Sit down. Behave. Smile, politely." Darla ignored him. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "What exactly did I do," she asked quietly, "to deserve being hated by my own mother?" Complete silence, real silence this time. Evelyn froze. Sabrina's face lost color instantly. Richard looked physically ill. And Garrett? Garrett looked angry. Not concerned. Angry. Because she disrupted the performance. Darla stared directly at Evelyn now. "Seriously, I want to know." Evelyn recovered quickly. Too quickly. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic." "No." Darla's voice cracked through the room sharply. 40 years of pain sitting behind one word. No more pretending. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Garrett stepped closer to her. "Darla," he warned quietly. But she barely heard him anymore. because suddenly all the humiliation, betrayal, loneliness, and confusion of her entire life rose to the surface at once. And for the first time, she stopped trying to make everyone else comfortable with her pain. Nobody moved. The entire dining room remained suspended in horrified silence while Darla stood at the center of it, breathing hard, her chest rising unevenly beneath the black satin dress Garrett once claimed made her look timeless. Now she felt ancient, not in years, in exhaustion. Evelyn recovered first, of course. She always did. Women like Evelyn Flores built entire identities around control. Public image was oxygen to them. Her smile tightened delicately. Darla, sweetheart, you've had too much to drink. There it was. The first defense. Discredit her emotionally. Darla laughed softly. You always do that. Evelyn blinked. When someone finally tells the truth, you make them sound unstable. Garrett stepped closer, immediately. Okay, enough. His voice remained calm, but Darla recognized the steel underneath it. Not concern. Containment. He wasn't worried about her pain. He was worried about the room, the investors, the whispers, the embarrassment. Darla looked directly at him. You cheated on me with your assistant. Gasps erupted quietly around the dining room. Chloe froze near the bar, face draining of color. Garrett's expression hardened instantly. Jesus Christ. You moved money offshore with my sister. Now Sabrina stood abruptly. Darla, stop. No, Darla snapped sharply. You stop. The room felt electric now, people shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to listen while hearing every word. Darla turned slowly toward Evelyn. And you, she whispered, you've hated me my entire life. Evelyn's face finally cracked slightly. Only slightly, but Darla saw it. Fear, not guilt. Fear that the truth was escaping. Richard stood carefully from his chair. Honey, maybe we should talk privately. No more private conversations, Darla said immediately. Her father flinched. That hurt more than she expected, because Richard Flores had spent 40 years loving her quietly while abandoning her publicly. And eventually, quiet love starts feeling identical to no love at all. Garrett grabbed Darla's arm gently but firmly. Come upstairs. Darla pulled away instantly. Don't touch me. The sharpness in her voice startled even her. Garrett's jaw flexed. You're humiliating yourself. That sentence did it. Not the affair, not the betrayal, not even the financial deception. Humiliating yourself, as if the real problem wasn't what they did to her. It was her refusing to absorb it gracefully. Darla looked around the room slowly. You know what's funny? She asked softly. I spent my whole life trying not to embarrass this family. Nobody answered. Every holiday, every dinner, every cruel comment. Her voice shook harder now. I swallowed all of it because I thought if I loved everyone enough, eventually someone would love me back the same way. Sabrina crossed her arms defensively. You're being dramatic. Darla laughed bitterly. There it is again. Then she looked directly at Chloe. And you? Chloe looked frozen, ashamed. Unlike Garrett, unlike Sabrina, unlike Evelyn. At least Chloe looked uncomfortable hurting another woman. Did he tell you I was crazy too? Darla asked quietly. Garrett moved immediately. Do not involve her. Darla ignored him. Did he tell you I was unstable? Emotional, difficult? Chloe swallowed hard. Silence answered everything. Darla nodded slowly. Of course he did. Because that was Garrett's strategy. Make women compete for his approval while positioning himself as the exhausted victim trapped between them. Classic. Predictable. Pathetic. The realization suddenly made him seem smaller, somehow. Less powerful. Evelyn stood carefully. This has gone far enough. No, Darla whispered. It hasn't gone far enough. Her eyes locked onto her mother's. I found the hospital bracelet. Silence detonated through the room. Real panic flashed across Evelyn's face now. Richard looked physically sick. Sabrina whispered, "Oh my God." Garrett frowned in confusion. What bracelet? Darla never looked away from Evelyn. Baby girl, haze. The color completely drained from Evelyn's face. And suddenly, Darla knew. Not suspected. Knew. Every horrible feeling she carried her entire life had roots. Real roots. Not imagination. Not oversensitivity. Truth. Evelyn sat down slowly like her legs stopped working. Richard rubbed a trembling hand over his mouth. "Darla," he whispered weakly. "No." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "No, you don't get to say my name like you protected me." That hit him hard. Good. For once, someone else could carry discomfort. Garrett stared between them, now confused and irritated. What the hell is going on? Nobody answered immediately. The room suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too intimate. Darla realized wealthy people hated emotional honesty because it destroyed the illusion that money solved suffering. But suffering lived here too. Inside designer dresses, inside expensive marriages, inside polished smiles. Evelyn finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have gone through my things." Darla stared at her in disbelief. That was her concern. Not the years of cruelty, not the emotional abuse. Privacy. "You called me difficult because I existed," Darla whispered. Evelyn's eyes filled instantly, but Darla no longer trusted her tears. Not after 40 years. "You looked at me and saw your shame." Richard suddenly stood. "That's enough." His voice cracked sharply through the room. Everyone froze, even Evelyn, because Richard Flores almost never raised his voice. He looked devastated, old, broken. "I loved you," he told Darla shakily, and somehow that made her cry harder, because love without protection becomes another form of abandonment eventually. "You let her destroy me," Darla whispered. Richard had no answer. Garrett finally stepped forward again. "We're leaving." Darla turned slowly toward him. "No, you're leaving." His expression darkened immediately. "This is my house too." Something inside Darla hardened. For years, Garrett weaponized calmness against her. Tonight, she no longer feared his disapproval. "You were planning divorce before I even knew my marriage was dying." Garrett lowered his voice dangerously. "Stop talking." "No." The word shocked even her. Simple, firm, final. "No." Garrett stared at her carefully now, really stared, and for the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Because manipulators rely on predictable emotional patterns. And Darla was no longer behaving predictably. She wiped her tears slowly, then looked at everyone in the room. "I spent 40 years believing something was wrong with me." Her voice steadied gradually. But maybe the problem was surviving in rooms where love was always conditional. Nobody spoke. Darla grabbed her coat quietly. Garrett moved toward her instantly. "Where are you going?" She looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw absolutely no safety there. Only control, only ego, only hunger. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. Then she glanced once more at Evelyn, at Sabrina, at Richard, at the family that built its peace on her silence. And suddenly, one terrifying thought settled deep into her chest. If the hospital bracelet was true, then she didn't even know who she really was. Darla drove for almost 2 hours before realizing she had no destination. Rain hammered against the windshield while Manhattan lights blurred in the distance like smeared gold across black glass. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers hurt. Everything inside her felt unstable, not dramatic, not irrational. Unstable in the way buildings become unstable after discovering the foundation underneath them, was cracked the entire time. Her entire identity suddenly felt questionable. Flores, Whitmore, difficult, wife, daughter. Every label attached to her life now felt contaminated by lies. By midnight, Darla checked into a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park because she physically could not bear the thought of returning to the Whitmore estate. The young receptionist smiled politely while handing over the room key. Long night, Darla almost laughed. If only strangers knew how casually someone's entire life could collapse. Inside the suite, silence swallowed her immediately. No Garrett, no Evelyn, no expectations. Just quiet. And somehow the quiet hurt too. Darla removed her heels slowly before sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the city skyline outside the windows. Then her phone began vibrating. Garrett. Again. 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 7 missed calls. 3 texts. Garrett. Come home. Garrett. We need to discuss this privately. Garrett. You're making a mistake. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I hurt you. Always strategy. Always control. Darla turned the phone face down. Then another message appeared. Mom. Evelyn. Please don't do this tonight. Darla stared at the screen in disbelief. Don't do this tonight. As if the real tragedy was public discomfort instead of 40 years of emotional cruelty. Something inside her snapped completely then. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a rope finally breaking after being pulled too long. Her entire life she had protected everyone else's emotional comfort at the expense of her own sanity. And where had it gotten her a cheating husband, a manipulative mother, a sister who helped hide money from her? Darla suddenly stood and walked toward the minibar, pouring herself whiskey she didn't even want. Her reflection stared back at her faintly through the dark window glass. 40 years old, beautiful still, intelligent, kind, exhausted. She remembered being 25 and standing beside Garrett in their first tiny apartment while eating takeout Chinese food on unpacked boxes. Back then, Garrett used to look at her like she was extraordinary, or maybe she only imagined that too. At 1:13 a.m., someone knocked softly on the hotel suite door. Darla froze instantly. Another knock. Careful. Not aggressive. She approached slowly before checking the peephole. Richard. Her father stood alone outside, looking shattered. Darla hesitated, then opened the door silently. Richard looked older tonight. Not physically. Spiritually. Like decades of cowardice had finally become too heavy to carry. I called your phone, he said softly. I turned it off. He nodded slowly. Neither moved for several seconds, then Richard whispered, Can I come in? Darla stepped aside quietly. Her father entered the suite awkwardly, removing his coat carefully, like he didn't know what he was allowed to touch anymore. The silence between them felt enormous. Finally, Richard sat near the window and rubbed both hands over his face. I should have protected you. The words instantly filled Darla's eyes with tears, because that was all she wanted. Not perfection. Protection. You watched her hate me, Darla whispered. Richard closed his eyes painfully. I know. Why? The question came out broken, raw, childlike. Why Richard stared at the carpet for a long moment before answering. Because I thought keeping the family together mattered more than confronting the truth. Darla laughed bitterly through tears. That's not love. No, Richard admitted quietly. It's fear. That answer hurt because it sounded honest. Not polished like Garrett. Not manipulative like Evelyn. Just weak. Human weakness destroying people slowly over decades. Darla sat across from him, hugging her arms tightly. Who is Caroline Hayes? Richard looked physically ill hearing the name, then finally whispered, Your biological father's wife. The room went silent. Darla felt cold all over instantly. What Richard swallowed hard. Her husband was named Michael Hayes. Michael, the dark-haired man in the hospital photo. Darla's pulse thundered. Richard continued carefully. Your mother had an affair with him before you were born, son. Every word landed like broken glass. She got pregnant. Michael panicked. He went back to his wife. Richard's voice cracked slightly. And your mother never forgave anyone involved. Darla stared at him in horror. Not even me. Richard's eyes filled with tears instantly. Especially you. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Darla suddenly remembered every cruel comment Evelyn ever made. Why can't you be easy? You ruin everything. You exhaust people. None of it had ever been about Darla's personality. Evelyn looked at her daughter and saw betrayal staring back at her. You knew I wasn't yours, Darla whispered. Richard nodded slowly. From the beginning. The pain that hit her then felt impossible to describe. Not because Richard wasn't her biological father, because he knew her whole life, and still let Evelyn emotionally destroy her. You should have taken me away from her. Richard broke completely then. Real tears, real grief. I loved you, he whispered shakily. God, Darla, I loved you so much. Love without protection isn't enough. Richard lowered his head. Because she was right. Darla stood abruptly and walked toward the window, trying to breathe through the pressure crushing her chest. Outside Manhattan glittered beautifully while her entire identity disintegrated quietly inside a hotel suite. Did Sabrina know? Richard hesitated. Too long. Darla closed her eyes instantly. Of course she did. Richard spoke softly behind her. Your mother told Sabrina years ago during an argument. Humiliation flooded Darla instantly. Everyone knew. Everyone. Except her. Suddenly, dozens of moments from childhood made sickening sense. The whispers stopping when she entered rooms. Sabrina's superiority. Evelyn's resentment. Even Garrett. Had Garrett known too? The thought made her stomach twist violently. Richard stood slowly. I wanted to tell you many times. But you didn't. No. Because silence was easier. Darla wiped tears angrily from her face. I spent 40 years believing there was something wrong with me. Richard looked devastated. There was never anything wrong with you. The tragedy was that she finally believed him. Now, after all the damage already existed. Darla turned toward him slowly. Mom called me difficult because I reminded her of the worst thing she ever did. Richard nodded weakly. Yes. Silence filled the room again. Then Darla whispered the sentence that terrified her most. I think Garrett talks about me the same way she does. Richard looked confused, but Darla suddenly saw the pattern clearly. Evelyn punished her for existing. Garrett punished her for seeing too much. Both needed her doubting herself. Both benefited from her silence. And for the first time in her entire life, Darla no longer wanted their approval. She wanted freedom. Darla didn't sleep that night. Not because her thoughts raced, though they did, but because for the first time in decades, she realized she had power. Real power. Not the kind that came from wealth status or appearances. The kind that came from truth, from knowledge, from finally understanding the full scope of betrayal she had endured. She lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain patter against the windows. The city outside shimmered like a million fractured promises, lights blurring into streaks of gold and gray. For years, Manhattan had been a backdrop to her life's invisible torment, the silent witness to her sacrifices and her humiliation. Tonight, it felt like a blank page. And for the first time, she realized she could write her own story. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Garrett. 7 missed calls. 3 texts. Come home. We need to talk. You're making a mistake. Not once did he say I'm sorry. Not "I love you." Not even "I was wrong." She turned the phone face down and let it buzz in silence. Then Naomi Carter's number appeared. Her mind caught. Naomi, the divorce attorney, whose reputation alone could intimidate corporate sharks. Darla dialed immediately. Darla Naomi's voice was calm, but sharp, perfectly steady. "You sound awake." "I am," Darla said. "And I'm done pretending that everything is normal." Naomi chuckled softly. "Good. I hate normal, especially when normal is abusive." Darla recounted everything: Garrett's infidelity, the offshore accounts, Sabrina's complicity, Chloe's presence, Evelyn's lifelong manipulation. She told Naomi about the hospital bracelet, the secrets, the emotional isolation, the invisible labor no one had acknowledged. Naomi listened quietly, jotting notes on a tablet. Then finally, "We start with proof," Naomi said. "Every email, every document, every receipt, every text. If we expose him, we expose everything: financial deception, emotional manipulation, the works. We do this systematically. Investors, board members, legal authorities, private if necessary, public if necessary. He will not see it coming." Darla's heart thudded. Justice, real justice. Not the kind you begged for silently while surviving someone else's comfort. Real justice. She began planning. Every moment now carried purpose. Collect every email between Garrett, Sabrina, and Chloe that revealed deception. Assemble evidence of her professional contributions to Whitmore's strategic group. Track financial transfers, hidden accounts, offshore funds. Compile a timeline of her sacrifices versus Garrett's disengagement and betrayals. Work with Naomi to develop a precise legal and strategic approach, ensuring her rights, her career, and her dignity were protected. Each bullet point was a weapon, a shield, a lifeline. For the first time, Darla saw clearly how much she had been underestimated. Garrett thought her compliant. Sabrina thought she was oblivious. Evelyn thought she was fragile. For decades, they had underestimated her because she had survived silently. Now, silence was over. By mid-morning, Darla had a plan forming in her mind. She didn't need approval. She didn't need pity. She didn't even need forgiveness. She needed action. She was ready to dismantle everything they had built on lies and control. The rain softened outside, turning to a drizzle, as if the storm itself had paused to witness her resolve. Darla packed a small bag laptop documents essentials. She stepped into the streets of Manhattan. The city, always loud and indifferent, now felt like an ally. Each step she took carried purpose. She would no longer allow others to dictate her value. She would no longer absorb humiliation silently. She would no longer bend. At a small cafe tucked between office towers, she met Chloe Bennett. Not the confident, polished woman from the birthday dinner, but a nervous, almost apologetic Chloe, eyes wide with uncertainty. "I shouldn't even be here," Chloe whispered. "If Garrett knew—" Darla held up a hand. "You're here now. Speak." Chloe exhaled. He promised me everything. Partnership, equity, even your house. And I believed him, until I realized what he really does to the people who care about him." Darla studied her carefully. Chloe had been a pawn, but now she was a potential ally. "Then give me everything," Darla said firmly. "Every email, every text, every piece of proof. No exceptions." Chloe handed over a USB drive, hands shaking. Darla accepted it, gripping it like it contained her very life. For the first time in decades, Darla felt something she hadn't felt in years: power. Not hypothetical, not fleeting, but tangible. Justice, strategy, and truth wrapped into one. She returned to the hotel, sat at the desk, and began the work of organizing it all. Emails, receipts, records of unpaid labor, financial documents, text messages, every contribution, every betrayal, every lie meticulously cataloged. Darla's pulse steadied as the hours passed. The room, once oppressive and lonely, now felt like a war room. Every piece of evidence was ammunition. Every betrayal was motivation. Every hidden account was a weapon. For 40 years, Darla Flores had been the difficult child. Tonight, she realized something frighteningly liberating. She wasn't difficult. She had survived. She had learned. She had planned. And she was finally ready to confront the people who had spent a lifetime trying to control her, manipulate her, and erase her. Tomorrow, the battle would begin. Tonight, she allowed herself a small, bitter smile. For the first time, she slept without fear. 3 days after leaving Garrett, Darla realized something unsettling. Peace felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable exactly, just unfamiliar. She stood barefoot inside the luxury Manhattan apartment Naomi helped her secure, temporarily staring at the sunrise bleeding soft gold across the skyline. The apartment overlooked the Hudson River, all glass walls and pale marble floors, quiet enough that she could hear her own breathing. No tension. No Garrett criticizing the way she spoke. No Evelyn's passive-aggressive comments. No Sabrina rolling her eyes whenever Darla expressed emotion. Just silence. And somehow, silence felt louder than chaos at first. Because women like Darla learned to associate love with emotional labor. If nobody needed her fixing something, who was she? The thought terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen island. Garrett again. 15 missed calls now. Several voicemails. Darla listened to none of them. Instead, she opened her laptop and continued organizing evidence with Naomi. Emails, financial records, investment transfers. Every hour, the picture became uglier. Not only had Garrett hidden assets, but he had gradually removed Darla's name from multiple operational documents over the years while still using her work internally. He wasn't just cheating. He was erasing her. The realization made her stomach turn. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Naomi entered carrying coffee and 2 folders beneath her arm. "You look better," Naomi observed immediately. Darla almost laughed. "You can tell. You stopped apologizing every time you speak." That hit harder than expected, because it was true. Even now, Darla still caught herself wanting to soften statements before saying them. "Sorry if this sounds crazy. Sorry if I'm overreacting. Sorry if this bothers you." Years of emotional conditioning turned self-doubt into instinct. Naomi sat at the counter opening the folders. "I pulled preliminary records on Whitmore Strategic Group." Darla leaned forward immediately, and Naomi smiled slightly. "Your husband is arrogant." Darla blinked. "That sounds personal." "It is." Naomi slid documents toward her. "Men like Garrett think intelligence belongs exclusively to them, which makes them careless when they underestimate women." Darla scanned the papers quickly, consulting contracts, internal restructuring memos, operational strategies. Then her breath caught. Her words. Entire sections pulled directly from proposals she wrote years ago. Garrett's signature sat beneath them. Not hers. "He stole my work." Naomi nodded calmly. "He built significant portions of his company using your intellectual labor while publicly minimizing your contribution." The humiliation hit deeper than the affair somehow. Because infidelity wounded the heart. But erasure wounded identity. Darla remembered staying awake until 3 a.m. building investor retention frameworks while Garrett slept. She remembered canceling opportunities because Garrett said, "We can't both be ambitious at the same time." At the time, she interpreted that as partnership. Now she recognized it as control. Naomi studied her carefully. "What are you feeling?" Darla stared at the papers. "Angry." "Good." The answer startled her. Naomi leaned back. "Anger isn't always destructive, Darla. Sometimes anger is the part of you that finally understands you deserved better." Silence settled softly between them. Darla looked out at the river. For most of her life, anger frightened her because Evelyn trained her to associate female emotion with shame. Good women endured quietly. Good wives stayed calm. Good daughters remained grateful. But what if silence wasn't goodness? What if silence was survival? Naomi interrupted gently. Garrett's already panicking. Darla frowned. What do you mean he's contacted 3 different firms trying to anticipate divorce exposure? A strange satisfaction moved through Darla's chest. Not joy, exactly. Recognition. For once, Garrett wasn't fully in control. Naomi handed her another document. This is more interesting. Darla looked down. Investor communications. Several major clients specifically requested Darla's involvement on previous corporate accounts. One note read, Darla Flores Whitmore consistently demonstrates stronger crisis strategy instincts than Garrett. Her chest tightened painfully. All these years, she thought nobody noticed her work. They noticed. Garrett just made sure she never fully realized her value. A memory surfaced suddenly. 5 years ago, after a successful merger presentation, Darla overheard an investor say, "She's the real brain in that marriage." Garrett didn't speak to her the entire drive home afterward. At the time, she thought he felt stressed. Now she understood better. Threatened. The realization changed something fundamental inside her. Garrett never loved her strength. He loved controlling access to it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Garrett. Sabrina. Darla stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. What? Silence briefly. Then Sabrina sighed dramatically. Jesus, Darla. You disappeared. Darla almost laughed. You helped my husband hide money from me. Can you stop saying it like that? The sentence stunned her. Like that. Not, it didn't happen. Just stop framing it honestly. Darla walked toward the window slowly. How should I say it then? Sabrina sounded irritated now. You're blowing everything up emotionally before understanding the full picture. The same language again. Emotional. Difficult. Overreacting. Everyone around Darla used the exact same vocabulary whenever she got close to truth. What exactly is the full picture? Darla asked, quietly. Sabrina hesitated. Then Garrett was trying to protect assets. From me. From instability. Darla closed her eyes slowly. There it was. The narrative. The family mythology. Darla as unstable. As dangerous. As emotionally exhausting. Years of manipulation suddenly felt so visible she almost couldn't believe she missed it. You know what's funny? Darla whispered. What I actually believed all of you. Silence. Then Sabrina softened her voice carefully. Manipulatively. Darla, Mom's worried about you. Darla laughed. A cold sound this time. No. Mom's worried I finally stopped apologizing. Before Sabrina could answer, Darla hung up. Her hands trembled afterward. Not from fear, from clarity. Naomi watched quietly from across the room. You okay? Darla nodded slowly. I think I'm finally understanding something. What Darla stared out at Manhattan. The problem was never that I was difficult. Naomi stayed silent. Darla continued softly. The problem was that I noticed things. I questioned things. I made people uncomfortable by reacting to cruelty instead of pretending it was normal. Naomi smiled, faintly. Congratulations. Darla frowned slightly. For what? You're becoming dangerous. The words should have scared her. Instead, they felt strangely freeing. Because for the first time in 40 years, Darla no longer wanted to be manageable. That evening, she attended her first therapy appointment in years. The office overlooked Central Park, warm lighting soft against dark wooden shelves. Dr. Elaine Porter listened quietly while Darla explained everything: the affair, the lies, the hospital bracelet, Evelyn, Garrett, Sabrina, all of it. When she finished, the room fell quiet. Then Dr. Porter asked gently, When was the first time you remember believing love had to be earned? Darla's throat tightened instantly. Childhood. Always childhood. Dr. Porter leaned forward softly. Darla, emotionally neglected children often become hyper-responsible adults because they believe usefulness creates safety. The sentence shattered something open inside her. Usefulness creates safety. That explained everything. Why she overworked. Why she tolerated disrespect. Why she kept fixing people who kept hurting her. Because deep down, part of her still believed abandonment waited on the other side of disappointing someone. Tears filled her eyes, silently. Dr. Porter handed her tissues gently. "You were never difficult," she said quietly. Darla cried harder, hearing that from a stranger than she ever had hearing fake love from family. Because strangers had no reason to lie. Later that night, Darla returned to her apartment emotionally drained, but strangely lighter. She stood alone by the windows again, overlooking the city. Then her phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. A text message appeared. "Chloe Bennett. Garrett lied to both of us." Darla stared at the screen slowly, and suddenly she realized the story wasn't over yet. Not even close. Darla almost ignored Chloe's message. For several seconds, she simply stared at the glowing screen while Manhattan shimmered outside her apartment windows, like a city pretending nobody inside it was broken. Garrett lied to both of us. The sentence sat heavy in her chest. Part of her still wanted to hate Chloe completely. It would have been easier, cleaner, simpler to turn the other woman into the villain. But Darla was beginning to understand something uncomfortable about men like Garrett. They survived by creating emotional competition between women. That way, nobody compared notes. Nobody saw the full pattern. Nobody realized they were all being manipulated differently by the same man. Her phone buzzed again. "Chloe. Please, just hear me out." Darla closed her eyes briefly, then typed one word. Where the restaurant Chloe chose sat downtown near Tribeca, dimly lit and discreet enough for wealthy people to destroy each other privately over expensive wine. Rain streaked softly across the windows when Darla arrived. Chloe already sat in the corner booth wearing a cream turtleneck and almost no makeup. She looked exhausted. Not glamorous, not seductive, just tired. For the first time, Darla noticed how young she actually seemed. Not in age, in emotional experience. Garrett liked women who still mistook control for confidence. Chloe stood awkwardly as Darla approached. "Thank you for coming." Darla sat carefully across from her. "You have 10 minutes. Chloe nodded immediately. "Fair." A waiter approached, but Darla declined everything except black coffee. She needed clarity more than comfort now. Silence stretched briefly between them. Then Chloe finally whispered, "He told me your marriage was basically over." Darla almost laughed. "Of course he did. He said you were emotionally distant." Chloe continued carefully. "That you stayed together mostly for appearances." Appearances. The irony nearly suffocated Darla. Garrett accused her of emotional instability, while privately describing her as emotionally unavailable to another woman. Manipulators changed narratives depending on which version benefited them most. Chloe looked down at her hands. "At first, I believed him." At first, Darla asked coldly. Chloe swallowed hard. "Then I started noticing things." Darla stayed silent because that sentence felt painfully familiar. Chloe exhaled shakily. "He talked about you constantly." That surprised her. Darla frowned slightly. "What kind of things?" Chloe hesitated. "Then he said you made him feel trapped." The words landed softly. Not because they were shocking, because they weren't. Darla remembered how often Garrett treated her needs like burdens, how every emotional conversation somehow became proof of her instability instead of his neglect. "He said you were impossible to please," Chloe added quietly. Darla looked out the window. Rain blurred the city lights beautifully. Impossible to please. What a fascinating phrase. as if wanting loyalty from your husband was excessive, as if expecting honesty was unreasonable, as if basic respect required too much effort. Chloe's voice softened further. But then I met you. Darla finally looked back at her. And you weren't what he described. The honesty in her voice felt genuine and strangely heartbreaking, because Garrett didn't just betray Darla physically. He rewrote her identity to justify betraying her emotionally. Classic narcissistic behavior. Destroy the woman's credibility before she can expose the truth. Chloe opened her purse slowly. I brought everything. She slid a thick envelope across the table. Darla stared at it carefully. Texts, emails, financial transfers, photos, hotel confirmations. Her pulse quickened instantly. You kept records. Chloe gave a sigh laugh. Women always keep records once they realize something feels wrong. God, that sentence. Darla suddenly understood Chloe wasn't stupid. She was simply the next woman Garrett convinced to doubt herself. Just like Darla once did. Chloe continued, quietly. He promised me equity in the company. Darla's jaw tightened. He what? He said once the divorce finalized, I'd become partner, officially. Partner? Garrett promised away pieces of a company built using Darla's labor, like she was already erased. Chloe's eyes filled slightly. He even showed me mock-ups for renovations at your house. Your house, not their house anymore. Darla suddenly felt physically ill, because Garrett wasn't just cheating emotionally. He was rehearsing replacement, replacing her role, replacing her presence, replacing her existence, as if 15 years together could be redesigned like furniture. Darla opened the envelope carefully. Inside sat printed email chains between Garrett and Sabrina. Her chest tightened immediately. More financial transfers, more hidden assets. Then one message froze her completely. Garrett. Darla's smarter than people think. If she starts digging emotionally, we'll have problems. Sabrina. Relax. She still wants everyone to love her too much. Silence. The restaurant noise disappeared around Darla, her own sister, reducing her entire emotional life into weakness. Chloe watched her carefully. I'm sorry. Darla barely heard her because suddenly everything made horrifying sense. Garrett didn't fear Darla because she was emotional. He feared her because she noticed patterns, because despite years of manipulation, some part of her still sensed truth underneath performance. And Garrett needed her doubting herself permanently. Darla looked up slowly. When did you realize he was lying to you too? Chloe stared down at the table. When he started describing me the same way he described you. Darla froze. Chloe laughed bitterly through tears. He called me needy last week. There it was. The cycle. Idealize, use, diminish, replace. Women weren't people to Garrett. They were emotional resources. Darla leaned back slowly, absorbing the full ugliness of it all. What does he want now? Chloe looked uncomfortable. He's terrified. That surprised her slightly. Terrified of what? You leaving quietly. Darla frowned. That makes no sense. It does if you understand Garrett. Chloe leaned forward carefully. He doesn't actually know how to function emotionally without someone organizing his life underneath him. The statement hit unexpectedly hard. Because it was true. Darla managed schedules, clients' emotional damage control, social relationships, investor trust, household operations, public image. Garrett performed success while women built the infrastructure beneath him. Darla suddenly remembered something Dr. Porter said during therapy. Some people confuse dependence with love because they've never learned emotional intimacy. Garrett never truly loved her. He depended on access to her labor stability and emotional intelligence. That realization hurt less than expected. Maybe because clarity finally outweighed illusion. Chloe slid one final paper across the table. This matters most. Darla picked it up slowly. Her stomach dropped instantly. Draft divorce strategy documents. Prepared months ago. Asset protection plans. Narrative management. Mental instability considerations. Mental instability. Garrett planned to portray Darla as emotionally unstable, legally. The room tilted slightly. Every time he called her dramatic, sensitive, difficult. It wasn't random cruelty. It was groundwork. A long-term strategy. Darla's hands trembled with rage now. Not sadness anymore. Rage. Cold rage. Chloe spoke softly. He said if you fought back emotionally, people would believe him over you. Darla looked up slowly. Then something unexpected happened. She smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with terrifying calm. Because suddenly Garrett's biggest mistake became obvious. He mistook Darla's kindness for weakness, and now she possessed evidence, intelligence, strategy, legal support, and finally, clarity. Darla gathered the documents carefully, then stood. Chloe looked nervous. What are you going to do? Darla stared out at the rain-covered city, and for the first time in her life, she stopped worrying about being perceived as good. Instead, she thought about justice, real justice. Then she answered quietly, I'm done surviving him. Her eyes hardened. Now he loses everything. Garrett Whitmore had built his entire reputation on composure. Investors trusted him because he never looked shaken. Clients admired him because he always sounded certain. Employees feared him because he controlled every room he entered, which was exactly why Darla chose the board meeting. Publicly, strategically, irreversibly. The conference room sat on the 43rd floor of Whitmore Strategic Group's Manhattan headquarters, wrapped in glass and steel, with panoramic views of the city below. Garrett loved rooms like this. Rooms designed to make powerful people feel untouchable. By 8:45 a.m., investors and executives had already gathered around the massive walnut table. Coffee cups, tablets, tailored suits, polite corporate smiles. Performance. Everyone performing confidence for everyone else. Garrett stood near the presentation screen, discussing quarterly expansion projections with two investors when the conference room doors opened, and Darla walked in beside Naomi Carter. The room went silent immediately. Garrett froze, just briefly, but Darla noticed. God, she noticed everything now. Naomi carried two thick folders beneath her arm while Darla wore a cream-colored silk blouse and black tailored trousers calm enough to terrify him instantly. Because Garrett expected emotional collapse. Not precision, not strategy, not this version of her. Darla, Garrett said carefully, What are you doing here? His voice remained smooth, but his eyes had already darkened. Calculating, adjusting, trying to regain control. Naomi answered before Darla could. My client has information relevant to company transparency and asset accountability. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Garrett forced a smile. This isn't the place. Darla finally spoke. I think it's exactly the place. Silence expanded across the room. For years, Darla would have shrunk under this kind of attention. Today, she felt strangely calm. Not because she wasn't hurt, because clarity removed fear. Garrett approached carefully now, lower voice, controlled. You're making a mistake. There it was again. Not, you're wrong. Not, the information is false. Just, you shouldn't expose me publicly. Naomi calmly distributed folders around the conference table. I suggest everyone review pages 4 through 19 first. Paper shifted softly throughout the room. Then silence deepened. Real silence. The dangerous kind. One investor frowned immediately. Another executive sat straighter, reading transfer records. Someone whispered, What the hell? Garrett's jaw tightened visibly. Darla watched him carefully. For 15 years, she feared this man emotionally. Now she finally understood something liberating. Men like Garrett depended on perception more than truth, and perception was fragile. One senior investor, Harold Bennett, looked up sharply. These offshore transfers weren't disclosed. Garrett recovered quickly. They're legal asset protections. Naomi spoke smoothly. Created while concealing marital financial information and potentially misrepresenting operational ownership structures. Another silence. Garrett turned toward Darla fully now. Cold. Dangerously cold. You went through private company records. Darla met his gaze evenly. You mean the company I helped build? That landed. Several people looked between them now differently. Not as husband and wife. As competing truths. Naomi opened another folder section. Pages 20 through 32 contain internal strategy documentation written entirely by Mrs. Whitmore, but submitted under Mr. Whitmore's executive authorship. Murmurs spread immediately. Garrett laughed once. Sharp, dismissive. This is ridiculous. Darla finally stepped forward slightly. Is it? Her voice remained terrifyingly calm. Because I remember writing the Hartford acquisition recovery strategy while you slept beside me. Garrett's eyes flashed. Darla continued. I remember creating the investor retention system your company still uses today. Another executive slowly removed his glasses. Recognition crossed his face. Harold Bennett looked genuinely stunned. That was your work. Darla nodded, quietly. Garrett immediately interrupted. She supported operations informally. Informally. Like her labor was decorative. Darla almost smiled. Because now she recognized the tactic instantly. Minimize, reframe, control narrative. But Garrett forgot one thing. Truth becomes dangerous once documented. Naomi placed additional papers onto the table. Time-stamped drafts, metadata records, internal communications. We were very thorough. Garrett's face changed then, subtly, but enough. For the first time since entering the room, he looked worried. Not emotional, not guilty. Worried. Because evidence eliminated his greatest weapon, plausible deniability. One board member flipped through pages rapidly. These investor projections were hers too, Darla answered calmly. Yes. Another executive spoke carefully. The London restructuring model. Yes. Harold leaned back slowly in his chair. My God. The room felt different now. Not hostile, exactly. Awakened, like people suddenly realized the polished mythology surrounding Garrett Whitmore had cracks underneath it. Garrett noticed the shift too, which made him dangerous. He straightened slowly. This is a marital dispute being weaponized emotionally. There it was. Emotionally. Darla almost laughed, because men like Garrett always called truth emotional once it threatened power. Naomi responded immediately. Actually, this is financial concealment combined with intellectual misrepresentation. A younger investor frowned. Were marital assets used to build these structures? Naomi smiled slightly. Yes. Garrett's control slipped another inch. Enough, he snapped sharply. The room froze. Because Garrett Whitmore never snapped publicly. Ever. Darla saw it instantly. Fear, not of losing her emotionally, of losing reputation, status, control. The only things Garrett genuinely loved. Harold looked at Garrett carefully now. Why wasn't Darla formally acknowledged within executive structure? Garrett recovered quickly again. She didn't want public visibility. Darla stared at him. The lie came so naturally. She remembered exactly when Garrett convinced her not to take executive credit. 5 years ago, after an investor dinner where multiple people praised her strategic instincts. That night, Garrett held her face gently and whispered, We work better when I handle public pressure and you handle internal brilliance. At the time, it sounded romantic. Now, she recognized it perfectly. Containment disguised as admiration. Darla looked directly at the investors. I stepped back because my husband repeatedly implied my visibility would threaten company stability. The room went silent again, because suddenly the dynamic became obvious. Not partnership, suppression. One executive quietly asked, "Did you know about the offshore accounts?" Darla answered honestly, "No. I discovered them accidentally while uncovering evidence of Garrett's affair." Another shockwave through the room. Garrett's face darkened instantly. "This is inappropriate." Darla finally lost patience slightly. "No. What's inappropriate is building an empire, using women you manipulate privately while presenting yourself as visionary publicly." Silence. Heavy now. Garrett stared at her with contained fury. And for the first time in 15 years, Darla didn't feel small underneath his anger. She felt free. Because once you stop needing someone's approval, their disappointment loses power. Harold slowly closed the folder. "I need full internal review immediately." Another investor nodded. Agreed. A third executive added carefully, until further clarification, all pending expansion approvals should pause. Garrett's entire body went still. There it was, the beginning of collapse. Not dramatic, not explosive. Corporate destruction happened quietly, like ice cracking beneath someone too arrogant to notice. Garrett looked at Darla like he barely recognized her anymore. Maybe because this was the first time she stopped protecting him. His voice dropped low enough only she could hear. "You destroyed me." Darla held his gaze calmly, then answered with the truth that had lived inside her for years. "No." A beat. "I stopped saving you." Garrett's expression cracked finely. Only for 1 second. But Darla saw it. Fear, real fear. And suddenly she realized something beautiful. The difficult child they mocked her for being was becoming the most dangerous woman in the room. The courtroom was colder than Darla expected. Not physically, emotionally. Everything inside it felt stripped down to facts, evidence, timelines, signatures, behaviors. No polished dinner parties. No luxury lighting softening cruelty. No carefully managed appearances. Just truth under fluorescent lights. Darla sat beside Naomi Carter, wearing a charcoal gray suit and minimal makeup, hands folded calmly in her lap, while attorneys shuffled papers around the room. Across from her sat Garrett. Perfect posture, perfect tie, perfect mask. But she noticed the tiny cracks now, the stiffness in his jaw, the exhaustion beneath his eyes, the subtle irritation every time Naomi spoke. For years, Garrett weaponized composure like armor. Now composure looked heavier on him. The judge entered promptly and the room rose. Darla inhaled slowly. This was it. Not the emotional ending of their marriage. That happened long ago. This was the legal autopsy. Naomi stood first. "Your Honor," she began smoothly, "this case involves marital asset concealment, intellectual misrepresentation, emotional coercion, and systematic financial exclusion during a 15-year marriage." Garrett's attorney immediately objected to the wording. Naomi barely blinked. Darla almost smiled. She loved watching competent women remain calm in rooms full of male interruption. The judge allowed Naomi to continue. And slowly, piece by piece, Garrett Whitmore's carefully constructed image began collapsing publicly. Financial transfers appeared first. Offshore accounts, hidden restructurings, undisclosed holdings connected to Sabrina Flores. The courtroom projector illuminated numbers across the walls, while Naomi explained timelines methodically. No emotional exaggeration, no theatrics, just facts, which somehow felt even more devastating. Garrett's attorney tried reframing everything as standard asset protection strategy. Naomi responded immediately. Then why conceal those protections specifically during periods where Mr. Whitmore privately discussed divorce preparation while continuing marital dependency structures? Silence. The judge looked unimpressed. Darla remained still. Months ago, this entire process would have emotionally destroyed her. Now she felt detached, not numb, clear. Because once illusion dies, grief changes shape. Garrett finally spoke directly. My wife is emotionally reactive and misunderstood several professional decisions. Emotionally reactive. There it was again. The same strategy, the same language. Darla watched the judge carefully. Older woman, sharp eyes, completely unimpressed. Naomi stood smoothly. Your Honor, opposing counsel repeatedly relies on emotional characterization rather than factual contradiction. The judge nodded once. Noted. Garrett's irritation visibly increased. Good. Naomi then introduced the second phase. Darla's contributions. Emails appeared on screen. Internal drafts. Operational systems. Strategic frameworks. All written by Darla. All credited publicly to Garrett. One by one, Naomi dismantled the mythology surrounding Whitmore's strategic group. The room grew quieter with every document. Because the evidence wasn't subtle anymore, Darla didn't assist Garrett's empire. She built enormous portions of it. Naomi turned toward the judge. My client postponed career advancement repeatedly to support her husband's public executive profile while continuing unpaid strategic labor internally. Garrett's attorney interrupted again. Mrs. Whitmore benefited financially from the marriage. Naomi nodded calmly. Yes, while simultaneously being erased professionally inside it. That landed hard. Darla looked toward Garrett briefly. He refused to meet her eyes. Interesting. The man who once controlled entire boardrooms suddenly couldn't look directly at the woman he underestimated. Then Naomi introduced the final category: psychological manipulation. The courtroom shifted slightly. This part mattered differently. Not financially, emotionally. Naomi approached carefully. We also submit evidence indicating long-term narrative conditioning designed to portray Mrs. Whitmore as emotionally unstable in anticipation of reputational and legal leverage. Garrett finally looked angry. Real anger. Because now they were exposing the mechanism itself. Not just the affair. Not just the money. The manipulation underneath everything. Naomi presented the divorce strategy documents Chloe provided. Mental instability considerations. Emotional unpredictability management. Suggested narrative positioning. The judge removed her glasses slowly. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully. Did you prepare legal reputation strategies before informing your wife your marriage was ending? Garrett's attorney intervened quickly. Preparation is not admission of wrongdoing. But the damage was already done. Because now everyone saw what Darla finally understood months ago. Garrett planned her emotional destruction long before she even knew she was under attack. Darla felt something strange then. Not triumph. Relief. Relief that the truth finally existed outside her own head. No more gaslighting. No more, you're imagining things. No more, you're too emotional. Reality documented itself publicly now. Then Naomi called Darla Flores to testify. The courtroom doors opened slowly, and Sabrina entered looking pale. For the first time in her life, she looked uncertain. Not glamorous, not untouchable, just scared. Darla watched carefully while her sister sat down. Naomi approached gently at first. Ms. Flores, did you assist Mr. Whitmore in transferring financial assets? Sabrina hesitated. Then I followed his instructions. Naomi nodded. Were those transfers concealed from your sister? Another hesitation. Longer this time. Yes. The words sliced through the room cleanly. Darla barely reacted externally. Internally, however, something painful settled permanently. Final confirmation always hurts differently. Naomi continued. Did you believe your sister was emotionally unstable? Garrett's attorney objected immediately. The judge allowed limited questioning. Sabrina looked uncomfortable now, like someone finally forcing her to speak honestly after a lifetime of performance. My mother always said Darla was difficult. There it was again. That word. The courtroom suddenly felt smaller. Naomi stepped closer, carefully. Difficult how Sabrina swallowed hard. Sensitive. Emotional. Intense. Naomi stayed quiet intentionally, allowing the silence to expose how vague those accusations actually sounded. Then she asked softly, did your sister ever abuse you? No. Did she ever exploit you financially? No. Did she ever betray family members? Sabrina looked down. No. Another silence. Heavy now. Naomi's voice softened almost sympathetically. So your sister's primary flaw was having emotions. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. Sabrina looked trapped, because for the first time, the family narrative sounded ridiculous out loud. Years of psychological conditioning collapsed under simple scrutiny. Sabrina finally whispered. She noticed things. The courtroom went completely still. Darla's breath caught slightly. Naomi tilted her head. What do you mean? Sabrina looked exhausted suddenly, like carrying lies finally became heavier than truth. She always noticed when people were pretending. God, that sentence. Darla felt tears burn behind her eyes instantly. Not because it hurt, because it explained everything. Evelyn resented her because Darla noticed dishonesty. Garrett feared her because she noticed manipulation. Sabrina distanced herself because Darla noticed performance. The difficult child wasn't difficult. She was observant. The judge studied Garrett carefully now, then asked the question that finally cracked the last piece of his image. Mr. Whitmore, she said calmly, can you identify one significant area of company success your wife did not contribute to silence? Garrett opened his mouth once, then closed it. For the first time since Darla met him, Garrett Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. And somehow, that silence felt louder than every cruel word he ever spoke to her. The family home looked smaller than Darla remembered, not physically, emotionally. The white colonial house in Greenwich that once felt enormous during childhood now looked like what it truly was. A beautiful container for generations of silence. Rain clouds hung low across the Connecticut sky while Darla stood outside the front door, gripping her coat tighter around herself. Naomi advised against coming alone. Dr. Porter definitely advised against it. But Darla knew this conversation had to happen. Not because she needed closure from Evelyn, because she needed to see whether her mother was capable of telling the truth without hiding behind performance. Richard opened the door quietly. His eyes softened immediately seeing her. Hi, sweetheart. Sweetheart. The word hurt now, not because she doubted he loved her, because love without courage had shaped her entire life. Richard stepped aside silently. Your mother's in the kitchen. Of course she was. Evelyn Flores conducted emotional warfare best in domestic spaces. Kitchens, dinner tables, living rooms. Places where cruelty could disguise itself as family concern. Darla walked slowly through the house. Every object carried memory. The crystal vase Evelyn loved. The staircase where Sabrina posed for prom photos while Evelyn cried proudly. The dining room where Darla learned silence kept peace. Strange how trauma embeds itself into architecture. Evelyn sat at the kitchen island wearing cream cashmere and perfectly styled hair despite the emotional collapse surrounding the family. Always polished, always controlled, even now. She looked up slowly when Darla entered. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. You look thin. Darla almost laughed. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry. Just observation without intimacy. Same as always. You testified against me in court. Evelyn continued carefully. There it was. The real concern. Public image. Darla remained standing. You spent 40 years making me believe something was wrong with me. Evelyn sighed softly. You're oversimplifying complicated things. Complicated. Another favorite word manipulative people use when simple truth threatens them. Darla crossed her arms. No, I think you complicated things to avoid guilt. That landed harder than expected. Evelyn's face tightened briefly. Tiny crack. Then gone. You don't understand what that time in my life was like. Darla stared at her mother carefully. For the first time ever, she saw Evelyn as emotionally weak instead of emotionally powerful. That changed everything, because fear disguised itself as control for decades inside this house. You punished me for your affair, Darla whispered. Evelyn stood abruptly. That's not fair. Fair. Interesting word. Darla stepped closer. What part isn't fair? The part where you called me difficult my entire life, or the part where you taught everyone else to see me the same way? Evelyn looked away instantly. There. Guilt. Real guilt. Not enough to apologize, but enough to avoid eye contact. Richard entered quietly carrying tea no one asked for. Peacemaking. Always peacemaking. Maybe everyone should calm down, he murmured weakly. Darla turned sharply. No. The word shocked even him. You don't get to calm this down anymore. Silence swallowed the kitchen instantly, because that was the real shift. Darla no longer feared conflict more than dishonesty. Evelyn folded her arms tightly. You think you're innocent in all this? Darla blinked slowly. Innocent. You've always been intense, emotional, impossible to comfort. No, Darla interrupted sharply. I was a child, reacting to rejection. The truth hit the room hard. Richard sat down heavily at the table. Evelyn looked furious now. Good. For once, someone else could carry emotional discomfort instead of Darla absorbing all of it. You have no idea what it's like, Evelyn whispered, suddenly voice cracking slightly, to look at your child and see the worst mistake you ever made. The sentence sliced through Darla's chest. Not because it surprised her, because hearing it out loud still hurt. 40 years old, still aching for a mother who looked at her with warmth instead of regret. Darla's eyes filled slowly. And what was my mistake? She asked softly. Being born, Evelyn looked away again. Cowardice. Always cowardice. Richard finally spoke. Evelyn. No, Evelyn snapped suddenly. Years of repression cracked open beneath the surface. You want honesty. Fine. Darla's pulse quickened. Evelyn laughed bitterly through tears. You looked exactly like him from the moment you were born. Michael Hayes. The man whose affair destroyed everything. Evelyn continued shakily. Your father stayed with me, but nothing ever felt the same afterward. Darla stared at her silently. And every time I looked at you, Evelyn whispered, I remembered who I became. There it was. The truth underneath decades of cruelty. Evelyn hated herself, and Darla became the mirror carrying that reflection. The realization devastated her differently than expected. Not because it excused anything, because it felt tragically human. Dr. Porter once said, unhealed people often punish others for emotions they cannot survive themselves. Evelyn never survived her own shame, so she transferred it onto her daughter. Darla sat slowly across from her mother. Exhaustion suddenly replaced rage. So you destroyed my self-worth because you couldn't live with your own guilt. Evelyn cried quietly now. Real tears this time. But Darla noticed something important. She no longer felt responsible for comforting them. That was new. That was healing. Sabrina entered the kitchen unexpectedly then. Perfect timing. Of course. She looked exhausted too. No makeup, hair tied back, no polished performance left. Her eyes moved carefully between everyone. This family is imploding. Darla almost laughed. Imploding, as if collapse happened suddenly instead of gradually over decades. Sabrina sat down slowly, then finally whispered, "I didn't realize how bad it got." Darla looked at her sister carefully. "Yes, you did." Sabrina flinched, because truth stripped performance away now. "You watched Mom tear me apart my entire life." Sabrina rubbed her eyes tiredly. "I thought you were stronger than me." That answer stunned the room. Even Evelyn looked confused. Sabrina's voice shook harder now. "You always noticed everything. You always confronted things. I learned early it was easier to stay quiet." God. There it was again. The family system finally exposing itself completely. Darla became scapegoat because she refused emotional dishonesty. Sabrina became favorite because she adapted to it. Different survival strategies. Same damaged childhood. Richard whispered brokenly, "I failed, all of you." Nobody argued, because he had. Love without protection creates damaged people. Silence creates damaged families. Darla looked around the kitchen slowly. The same kitchen where she spent years questioning herself, wondering why love always felt conditional, wondering why existing felt exhausting. Then suddenly she understood something with painful clarity. She was never difficult. She was honest, in a family built entirely around emotional performance. Evelyn looked up at her finally. Eyes red, voice small. "You were the only honest person in this family." Silence. Darla felt tears rise instantly. Not because the words healed her, because they came 40 years too late. She stood slowly. Richard looked panicked. "Where are you going?" Darla grabbed her coat carefully. "Home." Evelyn frowned slightly. "This is your home." Darla looked around the kitchen one final time, then answered softly, "No." A beat. "This is where I learned I had to earn love." The room went silent again. And for the first time in her entire life, Darla walked away from her family without feeling guilty for leaving. Garrett Whitmore's collapse happened slowly at first, then all at once. That was the thing about powerful men built entirely on perception. Once people started questioning the image, everything underneath it became unstable. Clients began withdrawing quietly. Investors delayed meetings. Executives stopped returning calls immediately. And worst of all, for Garrett, people started talking. Darla watched it unfold from the windows of her Manhattan apartment, while rain drifted softly across the Hudson River below. Naomi stood nearby, reviewing legal updates on her tablet. "2 more investors pulled funding this morning," she said calmly. Darla nodded once. No celebration, no dramatic satisfaction, just inevitability. Because Garrett didn't lose everything because Darla exposed him. He lost everything because he built his life on manipulation and assumed nobody would ever compare notes. Naomi glanced up carefully. "How are you feeling?" Darla considered the question honestly. Tired. Not angry anymore. Not shattered. Just tired in the deep emotional way people become tired after surviving years of psychological warfare. Naomi sat across from her. "You know he's trying to contact former clients privately. Damage control, desperation." Darla looked back out the window. For years, Garrett controlled every narrative surrounding her. Now he was losing control of his own. There was something poetic about that. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Unknown number. Darla answered cautiously. "Hello?" Silence briefly. Then Garrett's voice. Low, controlled, dangerously familiar. "We need to talk." Darla closed her eyes slowly. Once upon a time, those words would have filled her with anxiety. Now, they mostly exhausted her. "There's nothing left to discuss. You're enjoying this." The bitterness underneath his calm voice felt sharp. Darla frowned slightly. "Enjoying what watching everything I built fall apart." There it was again. Everything I built. Even now, he still couldn't fully acknowledge her contributions. Darla leaned against the counter quietly. You mean everything we built? Garrett laughed bitterly. Naomi poisoned you against me. The sentence almost made her smile, because manipulators always blame outside influence once their victim stops accepting mistreatment. Therapy poisoned you. Friends poisoned you. Lawyers poisoned you. Anyone except the person causing harm. No, Darla answered softly. You just lost control of the story. Silence. Then Garrett's voice lowered further. Come home. Home. Interesting word. The Whitmore estate never truly felt like home. It felt like a performance venue, where Darla spent 15 years managing everyone else's comfort. You don't miss me, she whispered. Garrett exhaled sharply. Don't do that. Do what turn everything into emotional philosophy. Darla almost laughed. Even now, he couldn't speak emotionally without sounding irritated by vulnerability itself. She heard exhaustion in his voice finally, though. Real exhaustion, not performance. I miss stability, Garrett admitted quietly. There it was. Not love. Stability. The woman who managed his emotional image, his social relationships, his home, his company structure, his chaos. Dependence disguised as marriage. Darla sat slowly at the kitchen island. You depended on me. Garrett stayed silent, because for once there was nothing clever left to say. Darla continued quietly. You didn't love me. You relied on access to what I provided. Another long silence. Then finally, Garrett whispered, I don't know how to do this without you. God. That sentence, 15 years waiting for emotional honesty. And somehow now it arrived too late to matter. Darla felt sadness move through her chest unexpectedly. Not because she wanted him back, because she finally understood him. Garrett Whitmore wasn't emotionally cruel because he enjoyed intimacy. He was emotionally hollow because vulnerability terrified him. Control felt safer than connection. Performance felt safer than love. And people like Darla became useful until they became inconvenient. I hope you figure it out someday, she said softly. Then she ended the call. Her hands trembled afterward slightly. Not from weakness, from closure. Real closure rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop hoping someone will become who you needed them to be. Naomi looked at her carefully. You okay? Darla nodded slowly. Yes. And for the first time, it was true. A week later, the Whitmore estate officially went on the market. The headline appeared online before sunrise. Whitmore Consulting Executive faces internal investigation amid divorce, fallout. Photos of Garrett entering corporate buildings flooded financial blogs. No smile anymore. No confidence. Just tension. The same man who once made Darla feel small now looked hunted by his own reputation. Sabrina called later that afternoon, crying. Real crying, this time. They froze some accounts, she whispered shakily. Darla remained quiet. Mom's freaking out. Of course she was, because Evelyn Flores survived emotionally through appearances. And now, the appearance of perfection had shattered publicly. Sabrina's voice cracked harder. I didn't think it would go this far. Darla stared at the skyline silently. That's because none of you believed consequences applied to the way you treated me. Silence. Then I'm sorry. Darla closed her eyes briefly. The apology felt real, but grief still remained, because sincere regret doesn't erase damage. I know, Darla answered softly, and surprisingly, she meant that too. After the call ended, Darla visited Dr. Porter. The therapy office felt different now, less like survival, more like rebuilding. Dr. Porter smiled gently. You look lighter. Darla sat down slowly. I think I finally stopped trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it properly. Dr. Porter nodded. That changes everything. Darla thought carefully before speaking again. For years, I thought healing meant getting an apology big enough to fix the pain. And now? Darla looked toward the window thoughtfully. Now, I think healing is accepting that some people break you because they're broken themselves. The words settled softly between them. Not forgiving abuse, understanding it. There's a difference. Later that evening, Darla walked alone through Manhattan while cold wind curled between buildings. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing home to manage someone else's emotions. Nobody monitored her tone. Nobody minimized her feelings. Nobody called her difficult for reacting honestly. Freedom felt strangely quiet. Her phone buzzed one final time. Garrett. Voicemail. This time she listened. His voice sounded tired. Older, somehow. I keep thinking about what you said. A pause. About me depending on you? Another silence. Then quietly, I think you were right. Darla stood beneath glowing city lights while traffic rushed endlessly around her. And suddenly she realized something beautiful. Garrett finally understood her value, only after losing access to it. The irony almost made her smile. She deleted the voicemail calmly, then kept walking forward without looking back. 6 months later, Darla Flores no longer flinched when her phone rang. That alone felt miraculous. She stood barefoot inside her new office in Manhattan, watching early morning sunlight spill across polished wooden floors while the city slowly woke beneath her windows. Flores Strategic Consulting. Her name. Only hers. The gold lettering across the glass office doors still felt surreal sometimes. Not because she doubted she earned it, because for most of her life, Darla associated visibility with danger. Children raised in emotionally unstable homes often learn the same lesson early. Stay small, stay agreeable, stay manageable. Visibility attracts punishment. But healing changed that slowly. Not dramatically. Healing arrived quietly through repetition, setting boundaries without apologizing, sleeping peacefully, trusting her own instincts, existing without constantly preparing for emotional attack. Darla finally understood peace wasn't boring. It was unfamiliar. Her assistant knocked lightly before entering. "You have 10 minutes before the Chicago investors arrive." Darla smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mia." After the door closed, Darla looked around the office slowly. The shelves, the conference table, the framed degrees she once kept hidden inside Garrett's home office because too many accomplishments intimidate people. God. The things women shrink to survive insecure men. A soft laugh escaped her. Not bitter anymore, just honest. Her company had grown faster than anyone expected, mostly because Darla no longer hid her intelligence to protect someone else's ego. Turns out, the difficult child became remarkably successful once she stopped wasting energy surviving emotional manipulation. Funny how that worked. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk. "Richard." Darla answered immediately. "Hi." Her relationship with her father remained complicated now. Gentler, healthier, still grieving. Richard sounded nervous. "Your mother wrote you another letter." Darla closed her eyes briefly. 3 months earlier, Evelyn sent a handwritten apology Darla still hadn't opened. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Some wounds no longer required reopening to prove they existed. "You can keep this one too," Darla answered softly. Richard sighed quietly. "She misses you." The sentence no longer controlled her emotionally. That was healing too. Missing someone doesn't undo damage. Darla walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "I hope she's finally learning how to miss people honestly." Silence. Then Richard whispered, "I'm proud of you." Her throat tightened instantly. Not because she needed the validation anymore, because part of her would always mourn receiving love so late. Still, late love felt better than none at all. "Thank you," she whispered. After hanging up, Darla stood quietly watching pedestrians move below like tiny scattered pieces of human urgency. For years, she believed healing would feel triumphant. Instead, it felt peaceful, quiet, like finally putting down something unbearably heavy you forgot you were carrying. Later that afternoon, Darla met Dr. Porter for one final scheduled session. The office looked exactly the same. Warm lighting, bookshelves, soft instrumental music playing quietly somewhere in the background. Only Darla had changed. Dr. Porter smiled immediately. "You look happy." Darla sat down thoughtfully. "I think I look safe." That mattered more. Dr. Porter nodded gently. "What does safety feel like now?" Darla considered the question carefully. "Not explaining my emotions to people determined to misunderstand them." A soft smile crossed Dr. Porter's face. "That's a powerful boundary." Darla laughed quietly. "You know what's strange? What I spent 40 years trying to convince people I deserved, kindness." Her eyes drifted toward the window. "Now I just leave rooms where kindness is absent." God. That realization alone felt life-changing. Dr. Porter leaned forward slightly. "What would you say to the younger version of yourself now?" The question hit deeply. Darla pictured herself at 6 years old, sitting silently in the back seat of Richard's Mercedes after being called difficult for crying. Tiny, confused, already shrinking herself emotionally. Tears filled her eyes gently. Not painful tears, healing tears. "I'd tell her," Darla whispered, "that being sensitive in a cruel environment isn't weakness." Her voice cracked softly. "I'd tell her noticing dishonesty doesn't make her difficult." Dr. Porter stayed quiet. Darla continued. "I'd tell her she was never hard to love. She was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to love properly." Silence settled beautifully around the room. Not empty silence. Peaceful silence. The kind that no longer demanded performance. That evening, Darla walked through Manhattan alone after work. Winter air curled softly between buildings while city lights reflected against wet pavement. People rushed everywhere. Couples laughing, taxis honking, strangers carrying pieces of invisible heartbreak through crowded streets. For the first time in years, Darla felt connected to herself inside the noise. Not lost, not performing, present. Her phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then curiosity won. A voicemail. Garrett. His voice sounded distant now. Smaller, somehow. "I saw your company announced in Forbes today." A pause. "You really did build everything." Silence stretched. Then quietly, "I'm sorry I only understood your value after losing you." Darla listened without emotion twisting her chest anymore. No anger, no longing, no desperate hope. Just distance, growth. Because healing finally taught her the difference between being loved and being appreciated too late. She deleted the voicemail gently, then kept walking. Snow began falling softly over Manhattan, tiny white flecks dissolving against dark coats and glowing streetlights. Darla stopped briefly near a storefront window and caught her reflection. Calm eyes, relaxed shoulders, no fear. And suddenly she realized something beautiful. The difficult child survived. The difficult wife escaped. The difficult woman rebuilt herself completely. Maybe difficult was never an insult. Maybe difficult simply meant impossible to fully control. A small smile touched Darla's lips. Then she disappeared into the glowing New York night. Not lonely, not broken, not waiting to be chosen anymore. Just free. Some people spend their entire lives trying to earn love from people who only know how to give it conditionally. They shrink themselves, stay quiet, explain, overgive, and carry everyone else's pain, hoping that one day they'll finally be seen appreciated, chosen. But one of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that no amount of loyalty can heal people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Darla's story reminds us that being called too emotional, too sensitive, or difficult is often what happens when you refuse to ignore the truth. Toxic people rely on silence. They rely on your guilt. They rely on your fear of losing them. And the moment you stop apologizing for your feelings, stop begging for basic respect, and finally choose yourself, their control begins to disappear. Healing is not becoming cold. Healing is learning that your kindness should never cost your dignity. It is understanding that boundaries are not cruelty. Walking away from people who repeatedly break your spirit is not weakness, it is self-respect. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop trying to convince others of her worth and quietly build a life where she no longer has to. And maybe that's the real message of this story. The people who called you difficult were often the ones who benefited most from your silence. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments. What was the moment Darla's journey hit you the hardest? And if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after betrayal, manipulation, or emotional pain. Remember this, your sensitivity is not your weakness. It's proof that your heart survived things that were meant to harden it. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional storytelling journeys about healing, self-worth, betrayal, and finding the strength to choose yourself again.